The amber lights of Outpost Korath flickered against the metal walls as Commander Vextal walked slowly into the briefing room. His old legs hurt from too many battles, and his 3 eyes were tired from 40 years of war. The Zephyrian alien had fought in more conflicts than he could count, but tonight would be his last briefing before retirement. 5 young alien soldiers sat around the curved table, talking and laughing like kids who had never seen real combat. Their uniforms were clean and their weapons had never been fired in anger. Vextal remembered being that young once, back when he thought war was glorious and enemies were easy to beat. "Commander," called out Ensign Kilnara, her crystal body sparkling under the lights. "Is it true that humans are joining our patrol group next month?" The other soldiers started giggling. Lieutenant Mordek, a huge alien with sharp tusks, slammed, his fist on the table. "Those weak little humans, they just learned how to fly between stars 20 years ago. What good could they possibly be to real soldiers like us?" Sergeant Kixara nodded her forearms in agreement. "I heard they come from a small blue planet with only one sun. They probably never even fought a real war." The laughing got louder. These young soldiers thought humans were a joke, just another primitive species that the Galactic Coalition had invited to join out of pity. They had no idea what they were talking about. Vextal's expression changed. His 3 eyes narrowed, and his old face became very serious. The laughter died away as the young soldiers saw their commander's look. They had never seen him like this before. "You think humans are weak?" Vextal asked quietly. His voice was so low they had to lean forward to hear him. "You think they are just primitives who got lucky?" The room became silent. Even the air recycling system seemed to quiet down. "Let me tell you about the first time I met human soldiers," Vextal continued, walking slowly around the table. "It was during the Kepler War, back when I was young and stupid like you. I was part of the intelligence team that studied human military records before we made first contact." He stopped walking and stared at each young soldier in turn. "What I learned about humans changed everything I thought I knew about war." Ensign Kilnara shifted nervously in her chair. "What do you mean, sir?" Vextal pulled out an old data pad and placed it on the table. "Humans are the only species in the entire galaxy that regularly fights total wars against their own kind. Not just small battles or arguments over territory. Real wars where they try to completely destroy other humans." The young soldiers looked confused. Lieutenant Mordek spoke up. "That does not make sense, Commander. Why would any species waste time fighting itself instead of exploring space or building cities?" "That is what I thought too," Vextal replied, "but then I saw their history files. For the last 5,000 years, humans have been at war with each other for 90% of the time. They have military schools older than our space program. They study war like we study science." He activated. The datapad and holographic images appeared above the table. The young soldiers saw primitive humans fighting with swords and spears, then with guns and cannons, then with massive machines that rolled across dead battlefields. "This is from their Second World War," Vextal explained, pointing at the images. "In just 6 years, humans killed 60 million of their own species. That is more deaths than the total population of most coalition worlds." Sergeant Kixara's forearms trembled. 60 million, but why would they do such a thing? "They were not fighting over food or water or living space," Vextal answered. "They were fighting over ideas, different ways of thinking about how society should work. They killed millions of their own people over concepts that existed only in their minds. The holographic display showed human factories working day and night, entire populations building weapons and machines for war. Cities were emptied as every human male between certain ages was sent to fight." "Look at this," Vextal said, highlighting a section of the display. "These humans named Daeho and Minsik are operating something they call radar. It was invented during their war to detect enemy aircraft. They also invented guided missiles, electronic computers, and atomic weapons during the same conflict." The young soldiers stared at the images with growing horror and fascination. "War is not just something humans do," Vextal continued. "War is how they advance their technology, test their ideas, and discover what they are capable of. Every major human innovation for the last 1,000 years came from military research." Lieutenant Mordek's tusks clicked together nervously. But surely this was unusual behavior, Commander. No species could maintain such violence for very long. Vextal shook his head slowly. I studied human records going back 12,000 years. They have been fighting continuous wars for their entire recorded history. They have never known true peace. The room was completely silent now. The young soldiers were beginning to understand that they had been very wrong about humans. When you meet your first human soldier next month, Vextal said quietly, remember this. You will be working alongside descendants of the most experienced warriors in galactic history. Commander Vextal pressed a button on his old data pad, and the air above the briefing table filled with moving pictures of human battles. The young alien soldiers watched with wide eyes as thousands of humans marched across muddy fields, carrying weapons and wearing metal helmets. This is what humans call their Great War, Vextal said, pointing at the images. They fought it 100 years ago. Watch carefully. The holographic display showed humans digging long trenches in the ground, stretching for hundreds of miles, across entire continents. Soldiers lived in these dirty holes for months at a time, surrounded by mud, rats, and dead bodies. They invented a new kind of war, Vextal explained. Instead of quick battles, they created a system where millions of soldiers faced each other across empty ground for years. They called it trench warfare. Ensign Kilnara's crystal body flickered with confusion. But why would they stay in holes in the ground? Why not just attack? They did attack, Vextal replied grimly. Every few weeks, officers would blow whistles, and thousands of humans would climb out of their trenches and run straight at enemy guns. Most of them died before they took 10 steps. The display showed exactly that. Waves of human soldiers climbing ladders and running across broken ground while enemy weapons cut them down like wheat in a field. Bodies piled up in enormous heaps. On one single day, Vextal continued, humans named Jinsu and Wu Jin were among 60,000 soldiers who were killed or wounded in just 24 hours. 60,000 casualties in one day. And they did this over and over again for 4 years. Lieutenant Mordek's massive hands shook. That is insane. No commander would order such attacks. No soldiers would obey such orders. Human soldiers not only obeyed, Vextal said, they volunteered. Young humans like Dongwu and Hyunwoo signed up to fight even after hearing stories from survivors. They knew they would probably die, but they went anyway. The holographic display changed to show human factories. Thousands of workers, including females and children, worked day and night making bullets, bombs, and poison gas. Entire cities were converted into weapon production centers. While there, soldiers died in trenches. Other humans invented new ways to kill, Vextal explained. They created poison gas that would burn out your lungs. They built tanks, moving metal fortresses with giant guns. They developed aircraft that could drop bombs on cities full of civilians. Sergeant Kixara covered her eyes with 2 of her 4 arms. They killed their own civilians? They called it strategic bombing, Vextal answered. The idea was to destroy the enemy's ability to make war by attacking the people who built weapons and grew food. Humans like bomber pilot Jae Sung and navigator Sung Min would fly over enemy cities and drop explosives on schools, hospitals, and apartment buildings. The display showed human cities burning, enormous fires that consumed entire neighborhoods, while people ran screaming through the streets. But here is the truly terrifying part, Vextal said quietly. After their Great War ended, humans looked at what they had learned and immediately began preparing for the next war. They studied every battle, every weapon, every mistake. They built war colleges to teach future officers how to fight more efficiently. The images changed to show human military academies where young soldiers learned tactics and strategy. Maps covered the walls showing how to move armies across continents and how to coordinate attacks involving millions of troops. 20 years after their Great War ended, humans began an even bigger conflict, Vextal continued. This time they had learned from their mistakes. Instead of getting stuck in trenches, they invented something called Blitzkrieg, lightning war. The display showed human tank formations moving incredibly fast across enemy territory, supported by aircraft and motorized infantry. Cities fell in days instead of months. Tank Commander Park Min-ho and Infantry Captain Lee Soo-jin perfected techniques for combining different types of military units, Vextel explained. They learned how to use tanks, aircraft, artillery, and foot soldiers together like pieces of a puzzle. No other species had ever thought of warfare as such a complex science. The young alien soldiers watched in horrified fascination as human armies conquered entire countries in weeks. The coordination was perfect, like watching a deadly dance performed by millions of participants. But the most frightening innovation, Vextal said, his voice dropping to a whisper, was how they organized their entire societies for war. Every human citizen became part of the military effort. Engineers designed weapons, scientists created new explosives, farmers grew food for soldiers, and factory workers built machines 18 hours every day. The display showed human women working in ammunition factories, human children collecting scrap metal for weapon production, and human, elderly people growing vegetables to feed the military. They turned war into an industrial process, Vextal continued. Humans like production manager Kim Ye-jin and logistics coordinator Choi Min-jae created systems for building weapons faster than any enemy could destroy them. They manufactured death on an assembly line. The holographic images faded away, leaving the briefing room in dim amber light. The young soldiers sat in stunned silence, trying to process what they had seen. "This is why we invited humans to join the coalition," Vextal said finally. "Any species that could do this to themselves would be absolutely unstoppable against external enemies." Commander Vextal touched his datapad again, and the holographic display showed a star system with 3 bright suns and 7 planets. The young alien soldiers leaned forward as they recognized the famous Kepler system, site of one of the coalition's most important victories. "This is where I first saw humans fight," Vextal said quietly. "I was a young intelligence officer aboard the battleship Korean's Pride. We thought we understood warfare until we watched humans in actual combat." The display showed 3 different colored fleets positioned around the Kepler system. Blue ships represented the coalition forces, red ships showed the Insectoid Hive Collective, and small green dots marked the Human Earth Defense Corps. "The Hive had 200 warships," Vextal explained. "We had 150 of our most advanced vessels. The humans brought 30 ships that looked like metal boxes with engines attached. Our captains laughed when they saw the human fleet." Ensign Kilnara's crystal form sparkled with curiosity. "What happened when the battle started?" "Everything went wrong," Vextal replied. "The Hive attacked first, as expected. We responded with standard coalition battle formations, maintaining proper distance and exchanging long-range fire. The humans did something completely different. The display showed the human fleet breaking apart into small groups. Instead of staying together in neat formations, the green dots scattered in all directions like seeds in the wind. Human Admiral Taeho and Commander Jiwon split their forces into units of 2 or 3 ships each," Vextal continued. "They used asteroids and space debris as hiding places. Our tactical computers could not track them all." Lieutenant Mordek's tusks clicked nervously. "But small ships cannot defeat large fleets. The mathematics of space combat make it impossible." "That is what we thought," Vextal agreed. "But humans do not fight mathematically. They fight emotionally, instinctively, like wild animals with advanced technology." The holographic battle began to play out in real time. Coalition and Hive forces maintained their positions, trading massive energy blasts across millions of kilometers. The human ships darted between the larger vessels like insects attacking giant predators. "Watch this," Vextal said, highlighting one small human ship. Captain Sang-woo commanded a destroyer called the Soul. Instead of firing at the enemy ships, he flew directly into the middle of a Hive formation and launched boarding pods. The young soldiers gasped as they watched tiny human spacecraft attach themselves to enormous alien vessels. The boarding pods looked like metal ticks, feeding on the hulls of the enemy ships. Human Marines like Sergeant Kyung-min and Corporal Hae-won actually entered Hive ships while the battle was still happening, Vextal explained. They fought inside enemy vessels using projectile weapons that could not damage the ship's hull. We had never seen anything like it. The display zoomed in to show the inside of a Hive vessel. Human soldiers in bulky armor moved through dark corridors, fighting insectoid warriors in close combat. Their weapons shot physical bullets instead of energy beams, and they moved in small, coordinated teams. The Hive collective intelligence could not adapt to this tactic. Vextal continued. Their ships were designed to fight other ships, not to defend against soldiers fighting inside them. Within 2 hours, human boarding parties had captured 12 Hive vessels. Sergeant Kixara waved her forearms in confusion. But how did they survive? Fighting inside a spaceship during battle should be impossible. Human military doctrine includes something they call shipboard combat, Vextal answered. Squad leaders like Minjun and Suhyun had trained for years in mock-ups of alien vessels. They practiced room-to-room fighting in zero gravity, with artificial atmosphere, in the dark, and under enemy fire. The holographic display showed human soldiers using specialized equipment designed for fighting inside spaceships. They had magnetic boots for walking on metal walls, compact weapons that would not punch through hull plating, and breathing apparatus that worked in damaged life support systems. But the most disturbing thing, Vextal said, his voice growing quiet, was how they treated their wounded. Human medics like Doc Jamin and Nurse So Young performed surgery while floating in zero gravity, with explosions happening around them. They had developed medical techniques specifically for battlefield conditions. The young alien soldiers watched in horrified fascination as human medics worked on injured soldiers inside a damaged enemy ship. The medical team used magnetic clamps to hold patients steady while they operated with handheld tools. When coalition soldiers are wounded, we evacuate them to hospital ships, Vextal explained. When human soldiers are wounded, their medics patch them up and send them back into battle. I watched Private Dong Hyun continue fighting with injuries that would have killed most coalition warriors. The display showed the final phase of the battle. Human boarding parties had captured so many Hive ships that the enemy formation began to collapse. The remaining Hive vessels tried to retreat, but human pilots pursued them relentlessly. Fighter pilot Lieutenant Su Jin and her wingman Jong Ho chased fleeing Hive ships into an asteroid field. Vextal continued. They flew through spaces too narrow for larger vessels, weaving between rocks at impossible speeds. Our pilots would never attempt such maneuvers. The battle ended with the complete destruction of the Hive fleet. Coalition forces had lost 15 ships while humans had lost only 3 vessels despite using the most dangerous tactics possible. After the battle, I interviewed human survivors, Vextal concluded. They treated the entire operation as routine. Captain Wu Sung told me that boarding enemy ships was basic military training on Earth. For them, it was just another day at work. The holographic display faded, leaving the briefing room in uncomfortable silence. Commander Vexital's 3 eyes grew distant as he touched his datapad once more. The holographic display showed a peaceful planet with green forests, blue oceans, and small human cities scattered across the continents. It looked like any normal colony world where families lived quiet lives. This is Kepler 442b, Vextal said softly. It was a human farming colony with 2 million people, men, women, and children who grew food and raised animals. The Hive conquered it in 3 days. The display changed to show massive insectoid ships hovering over human cities. Tall ant-like creatures with sharp claws and compound eyes marched through streets while human civilians watched from windows and doorways. The Hive expected standard post-conquest behavior, Vextal continued. Most species surrender completely after losing their military forces. They accept occupation, follow new rules, and eventually integrate into the conqueror's society. Humans did something very different. Ensign Kilnara leaned forward in her chair. What did they do, Commander? They vanished, Vextal replied. Not all at once, but gradually. First, the local police and government officials disappeared during the night. Then skilled workers like engineers and doctors began missing from their jobs. Within 2 weeks, the Hive found themselves ruling empty buildings. The holographic display peeled away the surface of the planet like an onion, revealing an enormous network of tunnels, caves, and underground chambers that stretched beneath every human settlement. The tunnel system was so complex it looked like the roots of a massive tree. Resistance Cell leader Kyung Ho and communications specialist Min Young had spent 10 years preparing for exactly this scenario, Vextal explained. While other species build defenses to prevent invasion, humans build defenses assuming invasion will succeed. Lieutenant Mordek's tusks clicked together anxiously. They planned to be conquered? They planned for every possibility, Vextal corrected. Human families like the Parks and the Lees had multiple escape routes from their homes. Every school, hospital, and factory had hidden entrances to the tunnel network. They could move their entire population underground in less than 72 hours. The display showed the underground world in detail. Humans had built sleeping areas, food storage rooms, medical facilities, workshops, and even schools in the tunnels. Children continued their education while their parents planned military operations against the occupying forces. But they did not just hide. Vextal continued. Small teams would emerge from concealed entrances, attack hive supply convoys, and disappear back underground before the enemy could respond. Saboteur Jin Wu and explosives expert Hai Wan could destroy a transport column and be back in the tunnels within minutes. The young alien soldiers watched as tiny human figures appeared on the surface, struck at hive vehicles with rockets and bombs, then vanished into holes in the ground that closed behind them like they had never existed. The hive collective mind could not adapt to this type of warfare, Vextal explained. They were used to fighting other species with centralized command structures. When you destroy the enemy headquarters, the entire military collapses. But humans had no central headquarters to destroy. The display showed dozens of separate resistance cells operating independently across the planet. When hive forces attacked one group, the others continued their operations without interruption. Tunnel fighter Nam Ho and supply coordinator Mi Jung created networks that could function even if most cells were captured, Vextal said. Each group only knew about their immediate neighbors. They passed messages through dead drops and coded radio transmissions that the hive could not intercept. Sergeant Kixara waved two of her arms nervously. How could they coordinate military operations without central command? It should be impossible. Humans had practiced this type of warfare for thousands of years, Vextal replied. During their Second World War, partisan leader Junho and saboteur Yejin organized civilian populations to resist occupation using assassination, sabotage, and psychological warfare. They turned ordinary citizens into soldiers. The holographic display showed human children as young as 10 years old, carrying messages between adult fighters. Elderly humans who looked like harmless grandparents were shown placing explosives under hive vehicles. Even human doctors and teachers participated in the resistance network. Sniper Kyung-min could operate alone for weeks, living off cached supplies and striking at individual hive soldiers. Vextal continued. When opportunity arose, she would seamlessly integrate with demolitions expert Soo-hyun's team to attack larger targets. They needed no orders from superiors because they understood the overall mission. The display showed the gradual breakdown of hive logistics as their supply lines became increasingly unreliable. Hive soldiers grew paranoid and suspicious, unable to distinguish between genuine human civilians and resistance fighters. Every human looked like a potential enemy, Vextal explained. The farmer bringing food to market might be reconnaissance specialist Chang-min gathering intelligence. The mechanic repairing hive vehicles could be saboteur Yu Jin installing hidden explosives. The hive never knew who to trust. The young soldiers watched as hive forces became isolated in their bases, afraid to patrol the countryside or interact with human civilians. What should have been a successful occupation turned into a nightmare of constant harassment and unpredictable attacks. After 18 months, the hive withdrew from all human colonies, Vextal concluded, not because they lacked military strength, but because holding human territory cost more resources than they could gain from it. The humans had turned their own worlds into weapons that consumed enemy forces. The holographic display faded to black, leaving the briefing room in thoughtful silence as the young alien soldiers contemplated the implications of what they had witnessed. Commander Vextal turned off the holographic display and walked slowly to the large window that looked out into space. The young alien soldiers could see human patrol ships flying alongside coalition vessels, their green and blue lights blinking in the darkness between stars. The Coalition did not invite humanity to join us because we felt sorry for them, Vextal said quietly, his three eyes reflecting the starlight. We invited them because we were afraid of what would happen if we did not. Ensign Kilnara's crystal body flickered with confusion. Afraid of humans, Commander? But they are so small and weak compared to most Coalition species. Vextal turned back to face his young officers. Size and strength mean nothing in modern warfare. What matters is the willingness to do whatever it takes to win. Humans have that willingness burned into their souls after 10,000 years of fighting each other. The old commander activated his datapad one final time. The display showed recent battles where human and coalition forces fought together against various enemies throughout the galaxy. When the Andromedan Empire invaded the Outer Rim territories, it was human Admiral Dong Hyun and General Seo Hyun who saved 14 coalition worlds, Vextal explained. They did not save them through superior firepower or advanced technology. Lieutenant Mordek leaned forward with interest. How did they do it, sir? They studied Andromedan psychology for 6 months, Vextal replied. Then they convinced the enemy that every coalition world was defended by human forces. The Andromedans withdrew their entire invasion fleet rather than face what they believed would be unwinnable guerrilla campaigns on 1,000 different planets. The display showed Andromedan ships retreating from coalition space without firing a single shot. The largest invasion force in galactic history had been defeated by reputation alone. Humans won that war without fighting, Vextal continued, but that victory was only possible because everyone in the galaxy now knows what happens when humans actually do fight. Sergeant Kixara waved her forearms nervously. But surely other species have learned human tactics by now. Why are humans still considered special? Because tactics are not enough, Vextal answered. You can teach someone to dig trenches or operate weapons, but you cannot teach them to keep fighting when logic says they should surrender. You cannot teach them to volunteer for missions that will probably kill them. You cannot teach them to turn their own homes into battlefields rather than submit to occupation. The holographic display showed human soldiers from recent conflicts. Medical Officer Tae Yang performing surgery on wounded comrades while under enemy fire. Colonel Minji leading a charge against superior numbers because her unit needed 30 more seconds to complete their mission. Captain Junho staying behind to hold a position while his soldiers evacuated civilians. These are not ancient warriors from human history books, Vextal explained. These are current coalition officers who serve alongside us today. Commander Subin and Major Hyunwoo fought in the Rigel campaign last year. They used the same tactics that their ancestors used against each other for millennia. The young alien soldiers studied the images with growing understanding. These humans looked ordinary, even friendly, but they carried themselves with the confidence of natural predators. When you serve under human tactical doctrine next month, Vextal continued, you will learn why every major coalition victory in the past 20 years has involved human strategic planning. Not because humans have better weapons or larger fleets, but because they understand warfare at a level other species cannot match. The display showed battle plans and tactical analyses created by human military officers. The complexity was staggering, with thousands of variables and contingency plans that covered every possible scenario. Human War College graduate Captain Wu Jin can plan a military campaign that accounts for weather patterns, civilian population movements, enemy supply chain vulnerabilities, and psychological factors that affect troop morale, Vextal explained. She thinks about warfare the way other species think about science or art. Ensign Kilnara's voice was barely audible. Are you saying humans are better soldiers than the rest of us? I am saying humans are more experienced soldiers than the rest of us, Vextal corrected. Every human child grows up hearing stories about wars their grandparents fought. Every human culture has military traditions that go back hundreds of generations. They do not have to learn how to be warriors because they were born into warrior societies. The old commander walked around the briefing table, looking at each young officer in turn. The coalition's greatest strength is not our technology or our numbers, he said firmly. Our greatest strength is that we convince the galaxy's most dangerous predators to hunt alongside us instead of hunting us. He stopped at the window again, watching human ships patrol the darkness. When Lieutenant Colonel Park Sang-woo briefs you on combat operations, listen carefully. When Major Kim Ye-jin explains tactical procedures, take notes. When Sergeant Choi Min-ho shows you weapon maintenance, pay attention. These humans have inherited knowledge that comes from thousands of years of constant warfare. The briefing. Alarm chimed, indicating that the transport ship had arrived to take the young officers to their new assignments. Remember this above all else, Vextal said as his officers prepared to leave. Respect humans not because they are noble or peaceful, but because they are the most competent practitioners of organized violence the galaxy has ever seen, and now instead of fighting each other, they fight for us. The young alien soldiers filed out of the briefing room with expressions of newfound respect mixed with healthy fear. They finally understood why humanity had earned its place among the stars.